welcome to episode 85 of Did You Bring the Hummus podcast. I'm Kimberly, your host, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. Did You Bring the Hummus is a podcast for all things vegan. Episodes post every Monday on your favorite podcast app. Before we get started, I have one very important question for you. Did you bring the hummus? Do you love the podcast? Would you get a kick out of hearing a shout out on a future episode? How about time to connect virtually with me and other listeners quarterly or monthly? Or if you're a vegan business who would like to sponsor episodes of Did You Bring the Hummus, I'd love to chat. Find out more under the Support the Podcast tab on my website. I'm now offering public speaking guidance and coaching, specifically for those who are terrified, but know that facing this fear is what will take them to the next level in business, career, or life in general. Check out the Public Speaking 101 tab on my website for more and schedule a free call to find out if I'm a good fit to help you navigate this journey. Today, I am joined by Drs Daisy Lund and Clare Day. Drs Lund and Day are two plant-based health professionals working as family physicians within the National Health Service in London, United Kingdom. They have their own podcast with the aim to improve nutritional education about the benefits of whole food plant-based diet for individual and planetary health. Dr. Day has worked as an NHS General Practitioner in a range of settings, including community and prison healthcare, having qualified as a doctor in 2011. Prior to studying graduate medicine, she studied science communication and policy, joined the civil service, and worked at HM Treasury as a policy advisor. She's been vegan for a number of years and is convinced of the benefits of long-term health of eating whole food plant-based. Explanations of how dietary change can help long-term conditions is something she tries to put at the very center of consultations with curious patients. She also does plant-based teaching for trainee GPs and colleagues. Like the rest of us, she is learning every day about food and health and, most importantly, the barriers to change for individuals. Dr. Lund is a practicing general practitioner with over 20 years' experience of working in the NHS. She is a GP trainer and medical educator at Imperial College in London, UK. Dr. Lund has an interest in preventative medicine and holistic health and incorporates diet and lifestyle into her consultations. She has completed the plant-based nutrition certificate at the University of Winchester and is passionate about nutrition education for healthcare professionals. Together with her GP colleague, Dr. Clare Day, she co-hosts In a Nutshell, the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK podcast. In this episode, Dr. Lund and Dr. Day discuss things like bone health and why dairy isn't a part of that. They debunk the soy myth, clarify why so many people think eating fish is healthy, and why it's actually not. B12 and how eating plants can help autoimmune disorders. Of course, they share their vegan journeys and their thoughts on hummus. Hi, Daisy. Hi, Claire. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello. Thanks so much for having us.
Really excited for this conversation today. So we're going to jump right in and we'll start with your vegan journey. Claire, why don't you share yours first?
Okay. It's quite a meandering tale. I mean, I love it when people say this happened and then that was it. But for me, I was vegetarian, then I went vegan, and then I was something in between, not going back to meat, but it was then sometime after that I was proudly calling myself a vegan, and I did identified myself as such. So as a young child, I would say I had a reaction to eating meat that's probably quite normal. I was driving along the motorway with my dad, and I asked the question, why do we never see dead cows or sheep or anything like that in the field? And his reaction was honest, and he said, well, we don't wait for them to die to eat them. And I think he probably said something like, well, we kill them first. So my reaction as a 6 or 7 year old was, I think I'm going to avoid this. I don't really want to be part of this. But it was really difficult. I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't think I could survive as a vegetarian. There was no internet. My parents didn't know any vegetarians. They were very keen to tell me that you had to eat meat to survive. But then eventually, I think my mum mainly kind of settled in with it and realised that I wasn't going to change. So she had to put certain things in place. You had to get permission at that time to take a packed lunch to school because they only served meat in the canteen. I felt really uncomfortable with being different. I didn't enjoy that part of it at all. I can remember going on a school camp and they served sort of a sweet corn omelette for the vegetarians every day. And there were a couple of us, but not many. At that time, you kind of get overwhelmed with things. There were sort of vivisection societies and a lot about stopping animal experimentation. And I was being sucked into all of that, but pretty much on my own. And then it felt like things got a whole load worse when I turned about 16 and I read Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. And I thought, oh no, there's more ways that I have to be different. The kind of studies in secondary school, in high school, that meant that you were expected to do things like dissect a rat. I didn't want to do that. I had to step away from things like that. And I did go vegan at that time. And I did that probably by eating a lot of breakfast cereal, a lot of toast, a lot of jacket potatoes. And then I made an interesting decision. I decided to move to Germany as an au pair. And I found that in Germany, meat was a big deal. They have it with almost every meal. They even have it for breakfast. And I was there as an au pair. So I didn't feel like I had complete control over deciding exactly what I ate. So I ended up sort of having things that I did to get out of difficult situations. And that would be having an omelette. I went with a friend. I was invited to a friend's in France, and she was like, my family just aren't going to understand what you do with your food. So I even had, a fish dinner at that time. And it was horrible, but I felt such a social pressure to kind of renege on this veganism thing. And I was very apologetic. And I think people now, they'll talk about, they say, I can't believe I said I'm sorry I'm vegan, and that must have come out of my mouth all the time, or a version of, or I'm sorry I don't eat eggs, or I'm sorry I don't eat cheese. Mm-hmm. And then I moved back to the UK, and I tried a bit harder, but even then I wasn't consistent, and I felt bad about this. But I was in a lot of excuses because I often said, oh, I don't tolerate dairy. That's why I don't eat it. I wasn't honest about what had initially turned me off having dairy. And I can't remember the sort of point where I said, I'm definitely vegan now. But I know that things that now, when I look back, they strike me as a bit strange. So, for example, I got married in 2010. I can remember talking to the caterers. I remember all the cakes had to be vegan. We had to have this kind of, vegetable stew as part of the main and things like that. And then somehow I can remember there being a big salmon sitting there. Mm. And that was all part of a conversation I'd had with the caterer, where the caterer had said, I don't think people are really going to enjoy your wedding if there's no non-vegan option at all. So I think you should have some fish. And I was like, okay, I can do this. So, I mean, now I look back and I think, obviously that, that would not be part of a celebration for me. But I was more keen to get this balance between pleasing those around me than sticking 100% to what my values were. And at some point that changed, and I felt like I could call myself vegan, and I would actually say to people I'm vegan, and I would stop myself apologizing. And what was so beautiful about it was that it coincided so well with what I was learning in my journey as a doctor, which was that I found that suddenly there was all this evidence of the health benefits. And, it wasn't stuff that I'd learned in medical school, it was some time after, but I could actually talk to patients about a diet that was in line with both scientific evidence and with my beliefs. So, that's how I've been for the last 10 years, but it started sometime before that. Yeah, I'm in a, obviously there are lots of things that make me sad about the world and how animals are. But in terms of my own personal position as a vegan, I'm in a really comfortable, happy place where I don't feel compromised. And that's a really good place to be.
Mm-hmm, for sure. I can relate to a lot of that, in that I went vegetarian overnight after reading an issue of PETA's Animal Times, but I didn't go vegan. And then I was single and I was dating and people thought it was weird that I was vegetarian. And I thought, well, if they think it's weird I'm vegetarian, like how could I even be vegan? But I knew that veganism was like the ultimate goal. But I too look back at that and I'm like, I really wish that you had just like stuck to it and been like, who cares? The person who I'm supposed to be with will be okay with me being vegan. And I just didn't have the confidence or belief in myself and what I had to offer to be able to embrace that. And now if I wound up single in my future life, I would never compromise on that. But I wasn't ready at that time. And I think a lot of us have experiences like that. Thank you for sharing that. Daisy, tell us your vegan journey.
Yeah, of course. So my journey started a lot later, actually. I'm slightly ashamed to say that the blinkers were on until the age of 40. And as with most vegans I've spoken to, the only regret I have in life is not going vegan sooner.
Mhm.
But I just didn't see the light until the age of 40. I perhaps did, having listened to Claire's story about her childhood, I do remember actually at about the age of 6 or 7, I was being fed some chicken, I guess, chicken meat. And I remember thinking it was on the bone and I just didn't like it. I just didn't want to eat it. I remember having that moment, and my parents, I mean, they didn't know any better at the time. They sort of said, no, you have to eat it. You have to grow. You won't grow and you won't be healthy if you eat it. And it reminds me a lot of what Melanie Joy says. I don't know if your listeners know of Melanie Joy, but society makes you believe that she uses a 3. It's normal, natural, and necessary. And that's how my parents brought me up. And so, as I say, they didn't know better. I can't blame them. But I didn't really think about what I was eating after that for many, many years. Just blinkered and continued with life until 2019. I watched a documentary called The Game Changers. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Mhm.
It's converted many of people, I've heard. But it really sparked my interest actually in nutrition at the time, because in medical school we don't get much nutritional education. Certainly we didn't back when I was in medical school. So I thought, oh, this looks really interesting, and we wanted to. Both me and my husband decided to go vegan overnight, um, for the health benefits and to see whether it will make a difference to our exercise performance. My husband's a keen cyclist. I was doing a lot of running at the time. And yeah, so overnight we did it, and we felt great actually in those 2 weeks. We both had a lot more energy than usual. Our sleep improved. DOMS disappeared. There was no delayed muscle soreness in the legs. And in that time frame, I started doing my own research on vegan diets and plant-based diets. And a bit like Claire, I was amazed to see the amount of medical evidence that showed how much better it was for our health, and how a lot of our food system, I suppose, is one of the key drivers to chronic disease. So as family physicians, we see a lot of chronic illness, and our food system is one of the drivers of that. So when I read, the first thing I remember reading was that the World Health Organization, the WHO, had classified red processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen, which means it causes cancer. I remember thinking, why hasn't anybody told me this before? I'm a doctor. How do I not know this? And I was feeding my son sausages or whatever. I just thought this is awful. And the more I read and the more I understood, that the more it became obvious that not just for health, but for the environment, and also for ethical reasons. So I did start to understand more and look into what happens in factory farms. And I learned about the suffering that we put these animals through for food that we do not need, and for food that is making us sicker and more unhealthy globally. And I actually went to a slaughterhouse. I stood outside slaughterhouses and I watched animals going in,
Mm.
and it was heartbreaking. And I actually met a slaughterhouse worker outside who has now become a vegan activist. And I learned about the social justice issues as well, not just for the animals in the slaughterhouses, but the people that are working in the slaughterhouses. So now I would say I'm vegan for ethical reasons. That's my strong driver. But as a doctor and as a plant-based health professional, I use my I suppose, my expertise and my medical knowledge to promote the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, because I think actually it's probably going to be the solution to both our health crisis, but also our climate crisis. And we, both Claire and myself, have done various further educational components. We both have done the University of Winchester plant-based nutrition course, and we're now both members of an organisation called the Plant-Based Health Professionals in the UK. And what we do is the organisation provides education and advocacy on whole food plant-based diet for prevention and treatment of chronic disease, not just for individual health, but also for planetary health. So we're now both heavily involved in that sort of work, which is great. So yeah, that's pretty much my journey.
That's amazing. And how I love that as doctors, you both had that moment where you were like, oh wow, look at all of this evidence out here. Look at what we hadn't been learning. And I've heard that so many times. I am lucky enough to live about 20 minutes away from Dr. Ron Weiss and his Ethos Farm. I don't know if you're familiar with him, that he is he's been featured in, I think, What the Health, but definitely Eating You Alive. And so he's a medical doctor too, traditionally trained, and then had, his father wound up sick with heart disease and kind of started digging into that, having the access he did as a doctor to look at other ways to help his dad live out the best way he could with the time that he had left. And so to hear doctors say that we didn't get the training we should have around how to feed ourselves and how to instruct our patients to feed themselves to be healthy. And it's always nice, and I think it's important for the listeners to hear that there's more to learn, and that there are doctors out there that are learning and have the evidence to show, hey, I know that you grew up this way. I know that everybody told you needed dairy to have strong bones, but here's what's actually the truth, and here's what's going to help you have those strong bones and be healthy. And so with that, I'm going to jump right into my first question for you is around dairy. Like we do, and especially as women, I think it's even more driven home that, like, if you are not pumping yourself full of dairy, you're going to end up with osteoporosis. You're going to end up, a foot shorter than you were in the prime of your life, and you're just going to wither away without all of this. So I'd love for you both to share what we really need to know about dairy and how to truly care for ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Kimberly would be happy to do that. I think, firstly, I think the dairy industry has done a really good job of marketing a product that we don't need. They've marketed it to the point that we believe, as you say, that dairy is important for calcium and our bone health. And if we don't drink it, we're not going to grow as children, and we're going to break our bones as adults. And as you say, particularly as women of a certain age, as we enter the menopause, people are worried about their bone health, but we simply do not need dairy for bone health. And there's really interesting studies actually that show that countries that consume the most dairy have higher rates of bone fractures. Absolutely. So the truth is, we don't need dairy to meet our calcium requirements. We do have calcium requirements, absolutely, but we can obtain that amount of calcium from a well-planned vegan diet. So that's the good news. And I'd go so far as to say that actually it'll be preferential to obtain your calcium from other sources, from non-dairy sources. And the reason I say that is because we know that 70% of the global population actually have a lactose intolerance. And what does that mean? Well, lactose is the sugar found in milk. And after weaning, most of us, a lot of us, will lose an enzyme or lose part of the function of an enzyme that breaks down that sugar in the milk, which means we can't digest milk very well. And that can cause all sorts of symptoms, from bloating, gas, abdominal pain, discomfort, diarrhea even. And, if you stop to think about it for a second, we're the only mammals on Earth that drink the milk of another species. So we really have no physical need for the milk of a cow, just as we don't have a physical need for the milk of a dog, for example. And I feel really ashamed to say it because I was lactose intolerant, and I kept drinking milk. I didn't realize that the GI distress was because of that, and I didn't connect those dots until much later on in life. Again, because of the whole education, I suppose, that we're given in society that we have to drink milk, it's normal. In fact, me and Claire were speaking a few weeks ago about being at school in the UK. Milk was actually subsidized, so we got free little bottles of milk. Don't know if your listeners in the US had the same. And, we were told that we had to drink this otherwise we wouldn't grow. So, that indoctrination starts really at a young age. But the good news is we don't need dairy. And I think personally we'd be better off without it. It's high in saturated fat, and that can raise things like cholesterol, which we know lead to heart disease, that being one of the biggest killers of the Western world. It causes inflammation in the body, excess mucus for some people. And in some people, it can even be linked to things like acne or eczema and other allergies. And interestingly, dairy milk is quite high in growth hormones, which it would be because it's meant to be for a baby calf to grow into a big cow. So growth hormones like IGF-1, we know can be associated with certain cancers. And the strongest evidence in humans for the link between dairy and cancer comes from studies in prostate cancer. The evidence for female cancers is a bit more mixed, but what we do know is that there have been studies to demonstrate that we have a reduced risk of breast cancer if we swap to soya milk. So a 32% reduction in breast cancer. So that's really excellent. And we are really big advocates for soya products and soya milk, and we can talk more about soya if you want. But there are lots of other good sources of calcium. So as I mentioned, soya and soya milk substitutes, they're often fortified with calcium and vitamin D and other things that we need. But, you can obtain calcium through non-dairy, through leafy green vegetables, especially low oxalate ones like kale, broccoli, bok choy. These are excellent sources of calcium. Me and Claire love nuts and seeds, so we always would eat nuts and seeds every day. Almonds are a great source of calcium. Sesame seeds. In the UK, we have a paste called tahini made from sesame seeds. I'm sure you do as well, which we make into lots of delicious sauces. And really funny things I didn't think even had calcium in it, like oranges, really good source of calcium. Yeah. Beans, legumes, there's so many good sources of plant-based calcium. And I think if you learn what they are, you make sure you incorporate them into your diet. In the UK, the guidance suggests we need 700 milligrams of calcium daily. US guidance is a bit higher at 1,000 milligrams, but this is really easily obtainable through plant-based sources. You mentioned bone health, and I just talked about calcium, but there is more to bone health than just calcium. So, but yes, we need calcium, but we also need vitamin D. Vitamin D is quite hard to obtain through the diet. We normally get vitamin D through sunlight on the skin. And in the UK, unfortunately, we have very grey, rainy weather. We don't tend to get enough sunlight. So we would recommend a vitamin D supplement to anyone, whether you're omnivorous or plant-based. And there are other considerations with our bone health. So exercise is really important, particularly weight-bearing activity. So trying to lift some weights, get into the gym or do your home gym if you don't like going to an outside gym. But weight-bearing activity will load the bones and keep our bones stronger for the future. And we need to start doing this quite early on in life. But you can start at any point. So any point you decide, actually, I'm going to give weights a go, buy yourself a pair of dumbbells or just use whatever heavy tins you've got at home, get started on those exercises. That's key for your bone health. And there are other considerations with our bones. So we need to make sure we maintain a normal BMI. There's been studies that show people that are too low in their BMI can have issues with fractures. And that can sometimes be an issue for plant-based eaters. because we know plant-based foods are quite not as calorie dense as meat and dairy. So we must make sure we don't get underweight. Smoking, that's another key thing, not to smoke, and to keep things like alcohol and caffeine to a minimum. So bone health is complex, and we could have a whole episode on it. I don't want to go on too long, but what I'm trying to say is we don't need dairy, and we could do very, very well without it. I haven't even touched on both the environmental and the ethical issues surrounding dairy, but just from a purely health point of view, there's plenty of other ways to get your calcium.
Yeah, thank you. You mentioned soy, and I think this one is so important because a lot of people seem to think that soy is going to make men grow breasts, and that because it has estrogen in it, that's the reason why women get breast cancer. And so I would love for you to share any information you have about that.
Absolutely. And we love debunking this myth. So on our podcast, we've actually done 2 soya episodes because we love soya so much. So soya is a really wonderful ingredient, actually. It's a bean, so the soya is a bean, and it comes in lots of different forms. So you can have soya milk, soya yogurts, soya congealed into what they call tofu or tempeh, which is fermented soya. And it really is a wonder food because it is so full of nutrients. It's high in various, not just calcium, but various micronutrients that we need for the body. It's high in protein. It's low in saturated fat. And it is, as I say, if you have things like tempeh, it's fermented soya, which is even better for the gut microbiome. So a wealth of really positives going for soya. And the negatives, I guess, are what I would say complete misinformation. So the estrogen concern about soya is the fact that plant estrogen is called phytoestrogen. And this is completely different from our normal human adult female estrogen. So it does not cause cancer, it does not cause breast development in men. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, there are studies showing it reduces the risk of breast cancer. And we know that countries that eat a lot of soya have got reduced risks of female cancers. And it's complex. It's the way that the phytoestrogen binds to part of the receptors in our body. So actually, in some parts of our body, blocks estrogen. So it's that protective for things like the breast. And that's why it's such a great source of vegan protein and calcium. And I think your listeners really need not worry about soya. And please don't listen to the misinformation spread about soya, because we can assure you it is very safe. And both me and Claire would recommend eating it daily. In fact, I think the guidance is two or three portions is recommended a day. It's not because it's not safe beyond that. It's because if you eat just all soya, then you're missing out on other great nutrients and other plant sources of food that you need. But yeah, fill your boots is what I'd say.
I love it. That's my favorite. I love soy milk. I love tofu, tempeh. I love edamame. So I am feeling
Very
very
nice.
confident in how I've been filling my diet with all things soy.
Lovely. We do too.
That is amazing. And I'm so thankful to have this wealth of information here about dairy, because not only is it something that we grew up believing, like we've talked about, we've got to have it. It also is super addictive. So when people try to stop consuming it and they're realizing they're having a hard time, if they don't know that there are other healthful options, it's so much easier to fall back into, well, it's too hard to give this up and it's good for me, so I'll just keep eating it or keep drinking milk or, having dairy yogurt. And so I think
Absolutely.
it'll push people, yeah, to
And
keep.
I think absolutely. I think, from the ethical point of view, I don't know, I know we're here from a medical perspective, but if you want us to talk
Yeah.
about the ethics at all, I mean, I think a lot of people are misinformed, that they think, oh, well, the animal isn't dying. What's the harm in taking the milk? And that's a common thing we hear. And The issue with dairy is that, you know, the cow has to be pregnant in order to produce milk. And the reason I laugh about this is because, again, until the age of 40, I hadn't really considered that. And I feel really embarrassed to say it. But, you know, again, it's that lie that I was fed as a child. Oh, here's this beautiful field. You've got the cow. And the reason I say this, Kimberly, is because my name's Daisy. And then I don't know if you have these books in the USA, but in the UK, we have Daisy the cow. It's a famous book. So I had this book and I read all about Daisy the cow and believe that she was having a lovely time grazing on this green pasture grass and giving us milk somehow. But that's far from the truth. And dairy cows live a really unpleasant life. Actually, they're impregnated, forcefully impregnated, year after year. And then, you know, when they give birth, the baby calf is taken away from them quite quickly because obviously the farmer needs to take the milk for humans. So that causes a lot of distress to both mother and child. And as a mother, I really feel quite strongly about that. I think no species should have to go through that. And to have to then repeat that cycle year on year. And what happens to the calf? Well, if it's male, it's not used in the dairy industry. So it's often, fortunately, killed at a young age or sold for veal. If it's female, it might go through the same fate as its mother. And then, you know, dairy cows can't do this forever. There's only so many times they can get pregnant. And you know, as they're being milked, they're also pregnant again. And so their lives, what can be, you know, 20 years plus, is shortened to about 6 years before they are slaughtered, and they are slaughtered for very cheap meat at that point. So to say that the dairy industry doesn't involve cruelty is actually far from the truth.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. The dairy industry has done a great job of hiding that, for sure.
Absolutely. We've got grown adults who still believe in Daisy the cow, then
Right.
that tells you something.
Absolutely. Claire, did you have anything that you wanted to add on this piece at all?
I was just absolutely amazed that Daisy got through talking about soya without talking about my menopausal flushes or absence thereof, because we're always promoting soya for menopausal women and sort of saying, you know, actually it has the opposite effect to breast cancer and it helps you get through the menopause. And well, we're not sure yet, but I don't really get hot flushes and I am of that age. So perhaps there is something in it.
Yeah, I think so. So the next topic that we wanted to talk about is fish.
Oh,
There are I can't tell you how many people have told me, "Oh yeah, I could give up eating meat. That's fine. I don't even care about cheese, but you know, fish is so healthy and so good for me. Like, I don't know, and it's so tasty. Why would I stop eating it?" Like, uh, and it's baffling to me from my perspective. Everything that brought me here to veganism is from the ethical side. I for a very long time was like, I don't care. I'll eat potato chips every day if it means that I'm not consuming animals. And so I had a really poor relationship with food, if you want to look at it that way. That's certainly the truth. And so for me, it was never like about what it tasted like or what I thought the health perspective was, but I was, you know, constantly driving home like how many billions of fish and then bycatch and that whole thing. And for people who are like attached to fish because of health, like they're like, I'm not interested in that. That's probably not true. You know, you're exaggerating. And so I couldn't get through to them. So I would really love to hear about this myth about why we think fish is a health food and why it's actually not.
right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fish. And I think there are two things to say about this. And the first one is that it's no wonder people are confused. Fish features in most dietary guidelines. They mention you should have 2 portions of fish a week. And if you're pregnant, you know, try and have an oily portion. And the health reasons for that are as simple as fish is a source of protein, but we can come back to that because it's obviously not the only source of protein. It's also a source of bad things that we're trying to avoid, like saturated fats. And the other thing about fish is that it's a source of these long chain fatty acids called omega-3s, which are good for heart and brain health. And that we do know. But the good news is you don't have to eat fish to get those. It's no surprise that the fish didn't make those themselves. They actually take in something called microalgae in the sea. And this is how they get these beneficial long chain omega acids. But I think I would love to say that it was as straightforward as to say you're healthier if you don't eat fish. It isn't that straightforward. It does come back to you don't have to eat it, and there are some reasons why you might not want to. And I think one of the main ones is the unknown quantity of toxins in fish, so much so that we advise that pregnant women don't overdo it on fish. You know, whatever the guideline says, it will talk about limiting the amount of fish that you have. And that's because of things like mercury that are very concentrated in fish. So that's a problem. Now, coming back to these omega-3s, there are different kinds. There's something called ALA, the alpha-linolenic acid, and that is found plentifully in plants. So things like flax seeds, walnuts, chia seeds. And that's why we really push vegans to eat these. And you can, in your body, convert those into these long chain omega-3s, which is the DPA and the EHA that's found in fish. But what we're not really sure about is everybody really good at converting those? Can everybody do it at the same rate? If you were pregnant, would you be able to do it enough? And that's where we come back to be absolutely safe, you actually should think about taking a supplement of omega-3s and the microalgae one that contains the DHA and the EPA. I would love to say that we're sure that you don't have to do that, but we're just not sure. I think when you look at overall health studies, you'll find that vegan diets have it in things like rates of diabetes, rates of cardiovascular disease. So the overall diet has a benefit, but I don't know that we've refined some of the studies enough to say, well, if you just have a bit of fish, would that be that harmful? And I don't think we can overlook the sustainability issue, because at a certain point, it's going to have an impact on our health as human beings. It's not sustainable. 50% of it is in so-called aquaculture. So that means that it's farmed. And we know that we're fishing the oceans to kind of 95% of their limit. And that means within that, some of them are being overfished. So for me personally, it's definitely something I think there are plentiful arguments for avoiding. It causes huge environmental problems. We know that 20% of the plastic that you find in the ocean comes from discarded fishing equipment. It ends up, the fishing, and as a result of fishing, you end up having around about 650,000 whales, dolphins, and seals killed each year. And those animals have got enough to contend with climate change, which is, of course, warming the oceans. It's making the oceans more acidic, and the pollution that goes into the ocean. So we have to treat this ecosystem of the oceans really, really carefully, because eventually those things are going to come back and bite us, maybe in the form of, the kind of pollutants that you're finding in fish going forwards. So for me, it's quite clear cut. If you can eat other things, why wouldn't you? And you did say, and I know that you may laugh or smile at this, but you did say about how a lot of people say, I can't give it up because it's so tasty. And there are so many good alternatives to fish on vegan menus. And, Daisy famously made me one of those fantastic tuna sandwiches maybe chickpeas,
Mm-hmm.
and she'd have to tell you what else she put in it. But obviously, you know, using a bit of nori or seaweed makes something taste quite fishy. You can use jackfruit to make things like fish cakes. And there are some really good alternatives to things like fish fillets and fish fingers that, although they might be made of soy, they taste quite like a white fish texture. And they've actually got the omega-3s that are so important or so healthful. Those are added in. So you can do that. And I think it's fair to say that on a population level, unless you're living in Japan or you're living in Scandinavia, you're probably not eating the guideline of fish twice a week anyway. So lots of people are eating alternative foods. So, you know, we know that it is something that you don't have to have in your diet and that you can replace the protein. And thanks to sustainable sources of omega-3s in the form of the microalgae, and they're also toxin free. So that's a win-win. Thanks to that, you can get all the health benefits that you could find in fish. And, you know, if I say something about the studies that are available there, when you test the blood levels of omega-3s in people that have, you know, ingested either fish or fish oil versus people who've taken these microalgae supplements, the levels are the same. So the benefits should be there. So I don't think we need to worry about that.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah, all good.
All good. Pre-vegans love to tell us, well, if you need this supplement, it obviously means that what you're eating isn't good enough. But if they were truly looking at their own workups and blood work and panels, I think they would find that they too are in need of some kind of supplements and they're missing out on things. And I do really love when a pre-vegan is, you know, their diet is mostly consisting of things like fast food and fried things, and they're making cheesesteaks at home. When they approach the way I eat or other vegans eat, and let us know that it's not healthy and it's not good for us, and so it's I think there are things that we all might need to be supplementing, and I hope that by hearing this, because a lot of my listeners are pre-vegan, by hearing this coming from doctors who have done the research, who are quoting this, you know, stats and things, that'll open their eyes and be like, oh, okay, like this is truly a healthful and safe way to live for all of us, not just the humans, but everybody else involved in this awful food system too.
Kimberly, the more you look into it, the more you realize that actually the animals themselves are supplemented in so many cases. So the farmed animals and their feed is often supplemented. So we're just taking out the middleman, really.
Right. Yeah, with the B12, right? Everybody's like, you can't get B12 as vegan. So if you absolutely can't get that as a vegan, it means that it's not really the way our bodies are supposed to be fed. But the animals, like you said, that they're consuming, they've been supplemented with B12 as well. And that's where that's coming from.
Claire's an expert on that, aren't you, Claire?
Well, no, I thought we were maybe just going to have a word about B12, because we never get tired of telling people to take the B12 supplement. I think with the other supplements, things are often on the fence. And, you know, with vitamin D, if you get enough sun and and you're not too dark skinned, maybe you can get away with it. Maybe you can have some mushrooms that have been exposed to light. But B12 is non-negotiable. If you don't take that, and we still find people in our practice who say, oh, I'm vegan, and they are obviously managing on the reserves that you have, because everyone's got a level of reserve when they stop eating eggs or meat or fish. Then they think they're okay. But if you don't take B12, then you will eventually get neurological problems with anemia. It's really, really important. And because we don't have a lifestyle that allows us to intake soil or, you know, other places where you might find it, you've got to have it as a supplement. And, you know, no matter how natural you want to be on a diet, you're being foolish if you cut out that supplement.
But B12 isn't even from animal flesh, isn't it? It's not, you know, people will say, oh, you have to eat animals to get your B12. Well, that isn't where B12 comes from. I don't know if you want to go in any further detail in that.
Well, so if you find it in animal products, at some point in the chain, that animal's feed or even the animal itself, direct by injection, it will have had a supplement of B12. And so that's why animal products are often so rich in it. So absolutely, it's cutting out the middleman. And it's so disheartening when people do say that, you know, well, if you're having to take a supplement, there must be something unnatural about this. Well, we're so off-piste with our food and our diet anyway. And as someone like Michael Greger would say, you know, we've gone from surviving to thriving. And so you want to really maximize health benefits where you see that we're living longer and we have to do things a bit differently, and that's okay.
Agreed. Thank you for sharing that. I love that it doesn't mean that we need to stop being vegan because B12 is only available through animals. And to bring him up again, Dr. Weiss, at his farm, the focus at the farm is to build up this nutrient dense soil so that when you're eating the greens, let's say grown there, like you take a bunch of kale, you just shake it off. You don't need to wash it. And then you are getting some of these like little microbes and stuff that are from the soil because it's been so like reworked and like creating this like nutrient dense soil. And I've heard people when I'm shopping at the he calls it the doctor's market. I've heard people say like, "Oh, I'm so happy that the market's open again, because like I'm tired of washing the vegetables from the grocery store." And we take it home, we shake it off, and we just throw the food in the salad, and you know, occasionally you end up with a little bit of crunchy dirt, but it's
Wow, that's impressive.
but it's just a really neat thing, and I love that that there are doctors like you guys and like Dr. Weiss that are educating people in these really nuanced ways that we so often miss out on this really important information.
Yeah, we feel like it's really important, and it's become our life mission, really, hasn't it, to educate and to provide that information because it is so lacking. And in the current climate of social media, there is so much misinformation. So it's almost double the work, not just providing the information, but debunking all the misinformation as well.
Yeah, there is a ton of that out there, especially with something that seems so emotionally charged. You know, people, and you don't even have to bring the cruelty involved in animals to get people to kind of be upset that you've presented another way for them to eat. Food is so tied to our cultures and traditions and histories, and some people just, especially now, you know, here in the US, there's this whole thing of like, don't tell me what to do and don't take my soda away. You know, in New York City, they tried to you know, tax really large sodas because who needs 40 ounces of soda? Apparently, a lot of people really need 40 ounces of soda, and they're pretty upset that someone would say they don't.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because you're right, it's so emotionally charged. And I think some of it comes down to people being scared of change, because obviously it is a big change when you shift your diet in that way.
Mhm.
But I think what, for me anyway, having been omnivorous for most of my life and now vegan for almost 5 years, I would say that it's been an absolute joy and pleasure and a diet of abundance.
Mhm.
And I am enjoying my food so much more than I did before. And that's really what I want people to sort of explore and understand, that you're not depriving yourself. We're not telling you not to eat your favorite foods. We're saying, look at it in a different way. You know, look at how you can make your favorite foods vegan, and that's possible, and it's tasty and it's nutritious and it's good for you. It's good for the planet. It's good for the animals.
We are closing in on time, but there was a question that I had shared with you that came from a couple of different listeners. So I do want to touch on this at least, is around vegan diets and autoimmune. Autoimmune seems to be like all the rage, if you will. Like suddenly I know, like everyone I know has some kind of autoimmune something or other. And a lot of the listeners were really curious about that because it does seem to be so prevalent and so reliant on medication to control things. Every single person said, my doctor said, I have to be on this medication for the rest of my life in order to manage my autoimmune issue. What are what is what are the studies or what's the truth behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So autoimmune conditions are conditions that result when your immune system gets a bit overactive. So it causes an attack on its own tissues, its own body. So normally our immune system, for example, provides proteins like antibodies, and these work to protect us against harmful substances. You know, we all know about viruses, for example, and our immune system can produce antibodies to protect us from those. But when you have an autoimmune disorder, your immune system attacks itself because it can't tell the difference between the invaders and the healthy cells. There are many different types of autoimmune conditions. So I think there's over 80, and it affects many people. I think in the US, probably figures say up to 24 million people are suffering with an autoimmune condition. So it's really common. And because there are so many of them, there's obviously many different symptoms and different triggers. And treatment, as you say, does mainly focus on medication to reduce that immune activity. So the medications can be quite difficult to take. They can have side effects. We would always say take your medication as your doctor has suggested and prescribed. But if you are interested in how diet and lifestyle can play a part, there have been studies actually, and there clearly are benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, because what whole food plant-based does is it reduces inflammation and it promotes a healthy immune system. And it also optimizes the health of the gut microbiome. So all these three things, by antioxidant levels, anti-inflammatory nutrients, these all can really calm down autoimmune conditions. And we have got studies on autoimmune conditions such as rheumatoid arthritis, for example, which is a joint condition which affects many young people as well. And we've actually recently come across some studies from the Netherlands, where they're doing a study called Plants for Joints. And this is really interesting because it's a well-designed, randomized 16-week trial of people with rheumatoid arthritis who are put on a whole food plant-based diet, as well as other lifestyle interventions like physical activity and stress management. And they're then reviewed after the 16 weeks. And the data has shown there has been a reduction in disease activity in all their joints. So a reduction in pain and inflammation in the joints, which is remarkable in such a short time frame, really 16 weeks. But also an improvement in metabolic factors, so things like their cholesterol levels, their BMI, even their markers of diabetic or sugar control, what we call the HbA1c. And this same group of doctors and researchers in the Netherlands also conducted the same study with people with osteoarthritis, which also we used to think is more wear and tear and age-related, but does have an inflammatory component. And it showed very, very similar improvements for them as well. So this is really exciting because it's starting to show how diet and lifestyle can affect autoimmune conditions. And this isn't new. I mean, we do have case studies, and we do have studies that, going back to even the 50s, we had actually a specialist on MS, on multiple sclerosis, come on our podcast. And MS is also an autoimmune condition. It's different to rheumatoid arthritis. It's a neurological autoimmune condition. But there's studies back in the 50s. Dr. Roy Swank did some dietary studies which showed that reducing saturated fat can improve MS. And so we are finding more and more studies actually coming out now in the last sort of 5 to 10 years about diet quality and how important that is. So especially we know that plant-rich foods, these foods I mentioned with high levels of antioxidants and polyphenols, these can be really good at reducing inflammation. So it's really exciting to see the literature coming out on this. And I would say to people with autoimmune conditions to obviously take the advice from their medical practitioner, but look into alternatives in adjunct to their treatments through diet and lifestyle. For example, something like MS, there is an organization called Overcoming MS. So if that's your autoimmune condition, have a look online. Overcoming MS is actually a global organization now. There are branches in the US, and they have lots of free online resources, and they follow the 7 pillars of lifestyle medicine, including a plant-based diet. So there's a lot of information out there, and as you say, for time reasons, we're a little bit constrained, but we'd be happy to come on and talk to you more about autoimmune conditions as and when the studies come through, because there's a lot coming through.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm very happy to hear that. Personally, because people I love are struggling through that. And just overall, anytime we can show how being vegan serves us all in all these different ways, I'm here for it every single time. Go
I
ahead.
think, no, I was just going to say, we always add to that actually that it's bad enough having something like rheumatoid arthritis, but unfortunately, we know that if you have got rheumatoid arthritis, you're more at risk, and actually MS as well, you're more at risk of things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes potentially as well. So even if you can't find exactly the evidence you want that that's going to make you feel better from your autoimmune point of view, you do need to sort of look across the piece of your health and say, well, actually, if I can do something about my cardiovascular health, it's going to help me out, because there's no point having, rheumatoid arthritis that's under control if you then die of a heart attack, to put it bluntly. So that's where the whole food diet will always help you out in reducing, rates and, things like cholesterol. It brings it down. It helps people with weight control. So we're always going to advocate that and say it's anti-inflammatory across the whole range of diseases.
That's a really good point, Claire. I hadn't thought about that because, when we look at the statistics, the numbers, Kimberly, are overwhelming. I mean, I was telling colleagues, a whole food plant-based diet reduces cardiovascular risk by 25%, type 2 diabetes, 50%, hypertension by 60%. I mean, the numbers are astounding. I don't think there's any single drug that does all of that across the board.
Definitely not a drug. Yeah.
Daisy, Claire, this has been incredible, and I have learned so much, and I know that the listeners are going to learn so much, and I would absolutely love to have you both come back and talk about some other health topics and just continue to educate us for sure. But before we go, I've got one more question for you both. So tell me about your favorite hummus or favorite way to eat hummus.
I'm going to say, I like to make hummus with, like, if I'm going to turn it into a luxury item, I like to find the fanciest butter beans I can find. And I don't need to mention any brands, but some are better than others. Blend those up and obviously add tahini and garlic and lemon juice. And I would just eat that with a really nice rye bread. That's my favorite way to have it.
Well, for me, I love this question, and I listened to all your previous episodes to see what your other guests have said about hummus, because I love hummus. But then I was thinking to myself, am I gonna say something really fancy and different, or am I just gonna be boring? And I'm gonna be a bit boring, Kimberly, and just say I just love hummus in its original form. I wanted to say something like chocolate hummus or something like that. I can't. But what I did find recently was actually I've boiled some chickpeas and made them really, really soft by boiling them. And then I made the hummus with boiled, very, very soft chickpeas. And the trick was to add the tahini, as Claire says, but the lemon juice and the garlic, and the water has to be freezing cold. So I did this. It took a lot longer than just sort of how I normally whip it up, but it was creamy and delicious and divine. So that will be my trick, a pre-boiled chickpea before you do your hummus.
I love it. I have never made hummus with butter beans, but you, Claire, are the second person to suggest that you make it with butter beans. So I'm finally going to do that. And Daisy, I too have never boiled them before, but now I'm going to test that out and see how much creamier they get when I do that. So thank you both for those two suggestions.
Pleasure.
Great.
I really am so thankful that you both were able to join me today. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I am super grateful that you were here today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you for having us. It's been really fun to chat with you, Kimberly.
Thanks for having us. It's great.
Welcome back. I learned so much from Drs. Lund and Day. What is your top takeaway? What surprised you? I truly would love to have them back on. If you would also like to hear from these incredible doctors, send me an email at info@didyouBringTheHummus.com with the questions you'd like to hear them answer. And find out more about the work of the Plant-Based Professionals UK at the link in the show notes. I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Please subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're loving it, please give Did You Bring the Hummus a 5-star rating and leave a review. It's an easy way to keep supporting the show. Be sure to share these episodes with your friends. If you're finding something good here, they will too. If you're a vegan or know a vegan who would be a great fit for the podcast, follow the Be a Guest link in the show notes. Fill out the quiz and I'll be in touch. Get on my mailing list and grab 3 super fun and easy recipes as a thank you. Check out the Support the Podcast tab on my website for more info on how you can help support this show as a monthly contributor or by sponsoring episodes. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Did You Bring the Hummus, and visit my website, didyouBringTheHummus.com, for more information about me, updates on what I'm working on, new podcast episodes, and all things vegan. Finally, I would love to hear from you. What do you need help with? Is there a topic you'd like to hear covered on a future episode? DM me on Instagram or send me an email at info@didyouBringTheHummus.com. Thanks for listening.